Thomas Pickering has been an ambassador to Russia, to the United Nations, to Israel. He'll be speaking tonight, along with others, on the Iran deal and the nuclear deal and everything going on around the world. I'm sure will become a part of this because there is so much happening. Thomas Pickering, good morning. Thanks for coming on the radio this morning.
Morning, and nice to be with you. Thanks.
So, talk about what, first of all, you have an amazing career. You've traveled the world and really represented our interests around the world. What was that like? I mean, as you look back on everything you've accomplished.
It was an enormously gratifying and very different, changing, varied experience. I was in countries as different as, say, India and El Salvador, and at the times that I was there was change going on, so it was a real challenge, obviously, to promote U.S. interests and watch what was happening in those countries and keep the U.S. government informed and give them my policy advice. But it was a tremendous experience, and obviously, if I had the opportunity, I'd do it all over again.
Yeah. And you've, how have you seen the times change? I have to parlay this at some point into, maybe a few tweets that went out about anti-Muslim tweets that went out yesterday, and get your opinion on that. But how have times changed? I mean, you're going back into the 1970s, 80s, 90s. You were in Russia 1993 to 1996. How have times changed around the world?
Well, let's grab the bull by the horns and say that yesterday's tweets were really dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, a man who wants to fight Islamic extremism buying on to a criminally inspired individual in the United Kingdom broadcasting false news and putting it around as if it is a characterization of all Muslims is a perfect recruiter for the people he wants to obviously eliminate.
Yeah.
How can one obviously deal with that? But it's symptomatic of what is happening in broader change. The world is now much more dominated by the electronic media and the instant reactions of people who would rather tweet than think, would rather blog than analyze, is a growing, I think, public danger to the world. The ability to and deal with problems in the world of virtual reality television rather than in the world of serious governance is a kind of end result in our country of changes that have been taking place all along. In Russia, I saw the end of the Cold War play out.
Yeah.
When I got there, everybody I dealt with was a communist appointee. When I left, many of those had changed, and those who hadn't changed had certainly changed their ideas in terms of how and what way they would deal with the question. Russia went on, unfortunately, I think, to be Putinized in a way that is quite different. Nevertheless, it is an important country for us to deal with.
Yeah.
And demonizing Russia or demonizing Iran is not a policy, it's a posture, and it's a posture designed in many ways to lead to conflict rather than ease tensions.
Prior to the most recent launching of a missile by North Korea, it was seeming that the president's rhetoric back and forth, in some cases calling, I think he calls him Little Rocket Man, and some of these things that have gone out over Twitter, it seemed to be working. Because we hadn't seen a launch in several weeks, but now we find that it really isn't working. Is there any way to stop North Korea?
I think there is, or at least slow it down. I was here yesterday in Washington and heard a wonderful speech by former Secretary of Defense William Perry, and he called it like it was. He said there's very little chance that we have of denuclearizing Korea, certainly in anything like the near term. But we can slow it down. We can make our deterrent much more effective. And I think that it's important, therefore, to accompany what the president is doing by ratcheting up the pressure, with which I fully agree. I don't disagree with him on that.
Yeah.
But we have to open the door to the solution, because the pressure is not going to produce precisely the answer we want right in our laps whenever we want it. It's going to have to be part of a diplomacy, of a diplomatic negotiation. And I compliment Secretary Tillerson on trying to keep the door open to that, even as the president keeps shutting it on his fingers, so to speak.
We're talking to Tom Pickering, who has been you were appointed by George H.W. Bush and were instrumental when you were U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, instrumental in the first Gulf War in putting the coalition together. That really, when you look at a model for how we need to move forward in an aggressive way, bringing everybody together in a coalition, that was a model. Do you agree?
It was, and that was something that I had the honor to participate in from the UN. President Bush and Secretary Baker did a phenomenal job in putting all of that in place, and it was an honor and pleasure to work for them in that particular set of activities, because we used and were able to use the Security Council of the UN as a foreign policy instrument for us and for the rest of the world to stop short and then roll back an illegal aggression of Iraq against Kuwait at a time when it was important, obviously, that the post-communist world responded to those kinds of things. And when it needed to, it used force, but it used force under a set of circumstances where we had a clear objective and obviously a strong outcome. If I had any criticism of that activity, and I was part of it, it was probably that we didn't end the conflict in a way that I think we could have, which would put us in a much stronger position to have isolated Saddam Hussein for the longer term and perhaps obviated the need that President George W. Bush felt. I think a need totally based in false assumptions to go in there again in 2003.
It was a back and forth. It seemed General Schwarzkopf at the time felt that we should go into Baghdad. Others, including Colin Powell, felt that we should not. So you believe that was a mistake, that we should have gone in and ended it once and for all?
No, I believe quite the contrary.
Okay.
What I think we should have done, and I recommended this, is to set up a UN-controlled zone in western Iraq outside the areas of population that would have put us in close contact with both the Shia, who were then opposing Saddam, but others, and then use the Henry Kissinger formula from the 1973 war of zones of limited armament inside Iraq and no-fly zones to put the permanent squeeze on Saddam. And that would have complemented something we never expected to happen, but happened almost instantaneously at the end of the war, that the Kurds revolted, and there was a strong United Nations Security Council effort to set up and to patrol a zone in northeastern Iraq at the same time. So we would have had Saddam in a very tight sandwich and very much limited his capacity to be offensive, I could put it that way.
All right, I got to tell you that Hamilton College students have, and we as a community have, such a luxury of being able to have these great speaking series coming in to Hamilton College. Tonight you'll be talking, the topic will be Iran and the nuclear deal, but some of the most knowledgeable people in the world come through Hamilton College. Students and people of the community get a chance to sit there and listen and even ask questions. What will you, well, I'll ask, how important is the Iran nuclear deal and finding some sort of peace, if you will, with the country of Iran? Especially in this global war with this terrorism, everything that we're facing in the world today.
Sure. First, let me say it's a great honor to be invited there. I was given an honorary degree a few years ago by the college, and that was a great honor as well. I'm going to talk about the necessity to maintain the agreement we have with Iran as a strong base for curbing Iran's capacities to go back toward a nuclear weapon, and at the same time as a base on which to build a new and follow-on agreement that would have worldwide application, but based on the principles that relate to the Iranian agreement, so that we would curb the tendency of any state to use civil enrichment and plutonium separation as a basis for a military program under the cover of civilian activities.
The president has said this was a terrible deal. But when you compare it to where we are with North Korea, where we have really no communication, can you talk about and do you have a fear that the president will pull out of this agreement?
Well, first, I think that we haven't quite seen the demonstration of the terrible deal business yet. I myself have a reservation about the deal. I'd like to have seen longer time limits, and so what I just told you about would be a deal that has permanent, open commitments with no time limits. I think that that's an important thing to look at. Secondly, I think that tearing up the deal puts Iran back in a position to go for a nuclear weapon if that's what it chooses to do, or to isolate the United States by keeping the deal and working closely with our friends and partners in that negotiation who said they would not, if we break the deal, and getting out of it would break the deal, support new sanctions, which the president would need on a universal basis to achieve any improvement in the deal, which he apparently thinks he wants to do. So I think it's a lose-lose proposition from the go.
Yeah. Finally, I want to ask you, if I could, you've seen a lot. You began your career in the Navy back in the mid-1950s, and through then service to the country, and then leading off to your ambassadorship. So take a look at the world, then going through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into today. Where do we stand in history? Is this one of the most dangerous times in history, or are we just over-exaggerating that?
I think it is. I think that we all thought, and those of us who lived through the Cold War thought it was, particularly in the early days when we had, I think, great instability around the possible use of nuclear weapons as a both political card to play in the Cold War, but more potentially accidental use. And, I was too young for my hair to turn white over the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I've been a little older. It certainly would have, particularly what I know after the fact, in terms of how close we came to the potential for nuclear use there. Now we're in a situation where we have to fight proliferation, where countries like North Korea, where countries like Iran, where others might well acquire a weapon, and the more countries that have them, the more likely we are to see those kinds of circumstances that could lead to accidental miscalculation, misperceptions about the other side's sort of approaches that could lead people into use. And so it is, in my view, a quite perilous time. It's a time in which, unfortunately, divisions among the great powers, Russia, United States, and China in particular, have led to the inability to use the mechanisms in the UN Security Council in a constructive way to put further pressure on those who would disrupt the international community by illegitimate uses of force, internal wars, the growth of terrorism. All of those things, I think, have put us in face of new challenges that we have to be concerned about. And it's the multiplicity of the challenges and the potential at the outer end to get acquisition of weapons of mass destruction that is a really difficult and, I think, unhappy consequence of our current set of problems. And having in the United States an administration which is seemingly searching for an answer, but is all over the map and doesn't have yet apparently a strategy for dealing with this particular set of issues, except day-to-day transactional stuff, is more than a little bit unnerving. It was the U.S. leadership in the international community to which everybody looked and want to continue to look that provided some stability in a world which has certainly gone in many different directions.
Thomas Pickering, what a privilege to speak with you, and thank you for all of your service. And the fact that you're coming here to Clinton tonight at Hamilton College is pretty amazing. So thanks so much for taking the time this morning.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
Have a great day. Thanks.